In this episode, we explore the unique journey of navigating relationships as a highly sensitive person. Vulnerability can be both a strength and a challenge for HSPs as we feel deeply and are acutely aware of others' emotions. Join me as I share personal insights, practical strategies, and the lessons I've learned along the way to foster meaningful connections while protecting our emotional boundaries. Whether you're looking to deepen connections, communicate your needs, or find peace within relationships, this episode will guide you in embracing the power of vulnerability as an HSP. Welcome to Ray the Quirky HSPs podcast, where I get real about life as a highly sensitive person. If you are an empath, an introvert, or just trying to navigate this overstimulating world without losing your cool, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Ray, lover of deep conversations, sarcastic humor, and the more than occasional solo adventure. So grab a cup of tea, settle in, and let's talk about embracing our sensitivity in all its quirky, beautiful forms. In today's episode, we're exploring something all HSPs face at some point: vulnerability in relationships. Relationships can be both fulfilling and challenging for highly sensitive people, and in this case, yours truly. Normally speaking in the first person wouldn't be acceptable, but because it's only my third podcast, we're still getting to know one another, so bear with me. It is my hope that through my sharing some intimate details, you'll be able to relate. For many HSPs, when we fall in love, we fall deeply. It's like our hearts are wide open and we're experiencing everything in vivid color. This intensity can be beautiful but also overwhelming. We might pick up on subtle cues from our partner, the tone of their voice, a small shift in their body language, and interpret those cues with a lot of meaning. It's both the gift and the challenge. When it comes to facing misunderstandings, sometimes being an HSP means seeing and feeling things that others don't notice. We might express our feelings or needs only to have them misinterpreted or minimized. This can lead to feeling misunderstood or dismissed, especially when a partner or friend doesn't quite get why certain things affect us so deeply. It's like we're speaking a different language when we're trying to communicate what's going on inside of us. Relationships, even wonderful ones, bring emotional highs and lows. For HSPs, those fluctuations can feel amplified. We might find ourselves needing more space or time to process emotions, especially after intense conversations or social gatherings. It's not about avoiding people, it's about needing to recalibrate and recharge. Vulnerability is essential in relationships because it creates genuine, deep connections that are built on trust, openness, and authenticity. For HSPs who naturally value meaningful interactions, vulnerability can be a gateway to relationships where they feel truly seen, valued, and understood. Here's a breakdown of why it's so vital. Number one, it fosters a true connection. When we're vulnerable, we let others see our authentic selves, the parts we're proud of and the parts we might feel insecure about. This honesty encourages others to let down their guard too, creating a bond that's based on mutual trust. Vulnerability allows others to see who we truly are, which helps HSPs avoid superficial connections and focus on people who are genuinely resonating with them. For an HSP, that depth can be the difference between a relationship that drains them and one that fulfills them. Number two, being vulnerable builds trust and intimacy. Sharing vulnerabilities can feel risky, but it also signals to others that we're willing to be open and real with them. This openness builds trust, showing that we're invested in the relationship and not just performing or pretending to be perfect. Trust develops more easily when we're willing to be honest about our needs, challenges, and feelings. For HSPs who may have a heightened sensitivity, insecurity, vulnerability reassures them and their partner that the relationship is based on authenticity. Number three, vulnerability strengthens resilience and self-acceptance. Being vulnerable isn't just about letting others in, it's also about accepting ourselves. When we're honest with others, we're actively embracing our own strengths and imperfections. This self-acceptance fosters resilience because we're no longer hiding parts of ourselves out of fear. For HSPs, self-acceptance is key, especially in relationships where they may be fearing being too sensitive or too much. I've been called too much or too sensitive. Not necessarily too much, but definitely too sensitive. Vulnerability helps people relate Vulnerability helps HSPs embrace their sensitivity as a strength and not something to hide or be ashamed of. Number 4, vulnerability helps filter compatible relationships. Vulnerability can act as a filter in relationships. When we're open about who we are, people who value us for that honesty tend to stay, while others who don't may drift away. This isn't rejection, although it feels like it. It's actually a way of finding people who appreciate our authentic selves. For HSPs, this is especially important because it helps them invest energy into relationships that support and uplift them, rather than relationships that might feel drained or incompatible. Vulnerability is about creating relationships that feel safe, genuine, and nourishing. For HSPs, embracing vulnerability allows them to step into relationships as their full selves, which can transform connections from surface-level interactions into deeply fulfilling experiences. Speaking for myself, I haven't been in a relationship since discovering that I'm an HSP, so most of my sharing has been with coworkers and in my book that I published last May of 2023. Opening up about my sensitivity wasn't about gaining anyone's approval. It was about helping them understand why I react the way that I do, especially in stressful moments at work. And although I'm not sure they fully relate, I'm glad I have shared it. There was something powerful about finally naming my experience and quirks. Recognizing that these were natural parts of who I am brought me so much clarity about myself, my past, my childhood, and even now as a woman over 50. Here's a breakdown for why it's so vital. Number 1, being vulnerable fosters a true connection. When we're vulnerable, we let others see our authentic selves, the parts we're proud of and the parts we might feel insecure about. This honesty encourages others to let down their guard too, creating a bond that's based on mutual trust. Vulnerability also allows others to see who we truly are, which helps HSP avoid superficial connections and focus on people who genuinely resonate with them. For an HSP, that depth can be the difference between a relationship that drains them and one that fulfills them. Number 2, being vulnerable builds trust and intimacy. Sharing vulnerabilities can feel risky, but it also signals to others that we're willing to be open and real with them. This openness builds trust, showing that we're invested in the relationship and not just performing or pretending to be perfect. Trust develops more easily when we're willing to be honest about our needs, challenges, and feelings. For HSPs who may have a heightened sensitivity to insecurity, vulnerability reassures them and their partner that the relationship is based on authenticity. Number 3, it strengthens resilience and self-acceptance. Being vulnerable isn't just about letting others in, it's also about accepting ourselves. When we're honest with others, we're actively embracing our own strengths and imperfections. This self-acceptance fosters resilience because we're no longer hiding parts of ourselves out of fear. For HSPs, self-acceptance is key, especially in relationships where they may be fearing being too sensitive or too much. Vulnerability helps them embrace their sensitivity as a strength and not something to hide or be ashamed of. Number 4, vulnerability helps filter compatible relationships. Vulnerability can act as a filter in relationships. When we're open about who we are, people who value us for that honesty tend to stay, while others who don't may drift away. This isn't rejection, it's actually a way of finding people who appreciate our authentic selves. For HSPs, this is especially important because it helps them to invest energy into relationships that support and uplift them, rather than relationships that might feel draining or incompatible. Vulnerability is about creating relationships that feel safe, genuine, and nourishing. For HSPs, embracing vulnerability allows them to step into relationships as their full selves, which can transform connections from surface-level interactions into deeply fulfilling experiences. Now, to get all the way real with you about myself, I haven't been in a relationship since discovering that I'm an HSP, and that was in 2020. So most of my sharing has been with coworkers and in my book that I published in May of 2023. Opening up about my sensitivity wasn't about getting anyone's approval. It was about helping people understand why I react the way that I do, especially in stressful moments at work, most importantly at work. That's where my biggest challenge is. And although I'm not sure they fully relate, I'm glad I shared it anyway. There was something powerful about finally naming my experiences and quirks. Recognizing that these were natural parts of who I am brought me so much clarity about myself, my past, my childhood, and even now as a woman over 50. Growing up, I always saw myself as a sensitive child, but learning that high sensitivity is an actual trait, something that's recognized and shared by others, was a revelation for sure. It allowed me to reframe those memories and see my sensitivity as something natural, not something to be ashamed of. I could finally give myself grace, recognizing that being sensitive was simply part of who I was and am, not a flaw or a weakness. One specific memory that stands out for me is when my older brother was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes and needed insulin shots twice a day. I was 8 and he was about 10. This was the summer before I guess we went back to school, and I was spending time in Virginia. And so when my mom and my brother came to pick me up in Newport News, they explained to me what was going on. And understanding that he was going to have shots, as a sensitive child, I felt an overwhelming fear about giving him those shots. I remember begging my parents not to make me do it, just let that be their thing. I was worried that I might hurt him if I didn't know how deep to stick the needle. I never have to this day given my brother an insulin shot. This memory really resonated with me as I've gotten older and now that I've recognized who I am, because it reflects how deeply I process fear and anxiety, especially in situations that involve someone I cared about. It's a perfect example of how my sensitivity manifested early on, and looking back, I can see that my reaction was a natural part of being an HSP. I just didn't have the words to explain it even to myself. One of the biggest challenges for HSPs is dealing with overstimulation, and for me that happens often at work. As an HSP, I'm constantly in an empath. I won't leave that out because that's also part of my personality trait. But as either one of those, highly sensitive person and empath, I'm constantly absorbing what's going on around me. So when I'm in a high pressure environment or around intense emotions, it can feel very overwhelming. But since it's my job, there's really no easy escape. I've noticed that when I'm overstimulated, I tend to stop making eye contact, which unfortunately can come across as aloof or even angry to others. It's not that I'm upset with them, it's my way of protecting my energy, but it's very so often misunderstood. This reaction can lead to feelings of judgment from my coworkers, especially if they see my response as overreactions or aggression. Over time, I've learned that understanding these signs within myself, like avoiding eye contact, helps me to manage the overstimulation a little better, even though it gets me in trouble. I hadn't figured out the balance on that yet. Even though it's still a work in progress, knowing these tendencies has helped me approach relationships more mindfully, whether it's by taking a moment to reset when possible or being compassionate within myself when I can't. For many HSPs, the fear of judgment or rejection is a constant challenge. Personally, when I find myself in situations where my actions are questioned or misunderstood, it makes me want to retreat within myself. I become extra cautious, holding back my emotions to avoid potential misinterpretation. The feelings that come up are a mix of frustration and sadness. It's difficult to feel seen or understood. In response, I often cope by spending more time alone. While solitude can be restorative, I recognize that withdrawing completely isn't always the healthiest option. Finding new ways to manage this fear is something I'm open to learning, especially if it can help me feel more grounded and less isolated. As an HSP and empath, learning to set boundaries has been a journey. Now that I understand myself better, setting those limits has become easier, and I've noticed people don't push my boundaries the way they used to. Still, this has led to feeling even more alone at times, as though the protective distance also creates emotional distance. There have been specific instances where boundaries felt essential for my well-being. For example, a coworker with whom I hadn't spoken to for years recently tried to reconcile the relationship, but was unwilling to work through the issues that led to our disconnect. It was tough, but I calmly chose to leave the relationship in the past. Then, with a close friend who I thought understood my personality better than even I did, there was an unexpected abandonment without explanation. Both relationships meant a lot to me at the time, but as they deteriorated, I healed and moved forward. I'll admit that I felt some guilt about setting boundaries, especially with people I care about, but I've come to realize that letting others encroach on my space or my peace ultimately hurts me more. Setting boundaries, even when it's hard, is an act of self-respect. Communicating needs as an HSP and empath, or even an introvert, can be a real challenge, especially when people don't fully understand our sensitivity. One of my biggest challenges is that people often see me as stronger than I feel I am, which leaves me feeling unseen, especially at work. Despite the inner struggles I may face, others can assume I'm unaffected simply because I appear composed. It's hard to feel fully understood in that environment. In my personal life, having alone time is something I truly cherish. I've been single and a loner for a long time, so being myself, or being by myself rather, is comfortable and even rejuvenating. But one thing that can be emotionally triggering is when someone asks me a question, but then doesn't listen long enough to hear my answer. Moments like these can make me feel invisible or unimportant, which is especially tough as an HSP. I don't have specific phrases that I use to communicate these needs, but I'm open to learning more effective ways to express how I feel. Finding language that conveys sensitivity without feeling vulnerable is an ongoing journey, but I'm hopeful that communicating openly and kindly about those needs can help others better understand and connect with me. Building fulfilling relationships as an HSP can be both a rewarding and selective process. While I haven't had many opportunities to apply my recent self-discovery in relationships, I know that the qualities I value most are honesty, genuineness, directness, and compassion. These traits help create a connection that feels easy, not forced, a space where I can feel safe and understood without needing to hide parts of myself. As HSPs, I think we instinctively know when a relationship feels supportive versus draining. A truly fulfilling relationship to me is one where both people bring empathy and acceptance, honoring each other's boundaries and unique needs. When I feel those qualities in someone, I know that the relationship has the potential to be both uplifting and sustainable. Alone time has always been essential for me. It's a part of who I am as a lifelong loner, and something I know I'll need in any future love relationship. Taking time for myself allows me to recharge, find balance, and stay connected to my inner self. My view on relationships has always been that while love brings us closer, we each need room to maintain who we were before the relationship. I believe that a healthy relationship doesn't just allow for a personal space, it thrives on it. When each person can continue developing and growing individually, it brings new depth and vitality to the connection. This is just my opinion. To anyone, especially other HSPs who might feel conflicted about needing alone time, I'd say it's a crucial part of building a strong foundation for love. Taking time to know yourself, whether it takes months or years, helps you enter relationships as your best self. Again, this is just my opinion. How could it be wrong to get to know yourself and be able to share your true self as you know yourself after having spent time with someone else? Alone time isn't pulling away. It's creating space to cultivate the authenticity and resilience that make a partnership truly fulfilling. Embracing vulnerability as an HSP or empath or introvert isn't always straightforward. It's something I still approach cautiously. I don't yet feel fully safe being vulnerable in most situations, and I haven't always found that others understood or appreciate what sharing my true self means for me. Often I feel like others listen without truly seeing or hearing the depth of my experience, and I rarely feel comfortable enough to be open. For those who are also sensitive, I'd say proceed with caution when it comes to being vulnerable. Sharing openly isn't something to take lightly, especially if you don't feel safe. However, when the time feels right and the relationship feels truly supportive, vulnerability can be a way to honor your own experience and invite a deeper level of connection. To add, be very careful about who you reveal yourself to. Only share with people you trust to see and understand you. Sometimes revealing your sensitivity can do more harm than good, especially if the person doesn't have the capacity to appreciate or validate your feelings. If you believe that opening up to someone will be a positive experience, then go for it. But if you sense that a relationship doesn't allow you to feel safe and seen, it might be worth considering letting go of that relationship altogether. I've done it. Been there, done that. Bought a t-shirt. Protecting your emotional space is key. In today's episode, we've explored the unique journey of navigating relationships as a HSP, from setting healthy boundaries to embracing alone time and acknowledging vulnerability. For many of us who feel things deeply, relationships require a delicate balance of connection and self-care. If there's one thing I'd encourage, it's to honor who you are in your relationships. Take time to know yourself. Communicate your needs thoughtfully. And remember that true connection is built slowly, with care. Vulnerability doesn't need to be rushed or forced. It's okay to proceed at your own pace and let people in when you feel safe. If you're an HSP or empath or introvert navigating relationships, know that your experiences are valid and that you're not alone. Thank you for tuning in to Ray the Quirky HSP podcast. Remember, being a highly sensitive person is a journey that's uniquely yours. Until next time, keep embracing your quirks and honoring your authentic self. Peace. Thanks for hanging out with me today on Ray the Quirky HSP podcast. If today's episode made you feel seen, heard, or maybe just a little less alone, make sure to hit that follow button, hit that plus sign, and if you're feeling generous, hit that share and enlighten a friend. And reviews don't hurt. They only help my podcast to grow, so go on and do that too, please. And hey, I'd love to hear from you. Reach out to my website. It is theresaray.com. That's the number 3, SARAYE.com. Please share your thoughts. Sign up there to be notified of when I move and how I move, and let me know what topics you'd love for me to dive into next. Remember, your sensitivity isn't a flaw. It's your superpower. Until next time, stay quirky, stay kind, and keep shining.